unsession. The governor made this a priority. He's talked about this on several occasions, repealing bills that he doesn't think we need anymore and that can maybe be cleaned up, including apparently, I didn't even know this, but apparently it's illegal to drive in neutral in reverse. But that, among other things, he's identified as potential subjects of the unsession. What do we think about the unsession? We'll start with you, Senator. What do you think?
I attended a couple of the meetings that the governor had his administration host on the unsession. Went through various things that could be taken out of the statutes, could be done away with. I think that the agencies have done a pretty thorough job of going through and picking out some things that we probably don't need. I know one of the things we kind of laughed about that day was the legislation that statutes that handle the telegraphs. We probably don't need to worry too much more about that anymore today. So I think that we do need to clean a lot of that up. In the past, we've called it a reviser's bill and kind of taken care of it that way. But, you know, no matter how we get it done, we need to do it. So the fact that we're getting a lot of this stuff taken off the books is a good deal, and we need to do that, and we need to continue to do that.
You know, one thing I'm curious about, and I would ask the panelists as a whole, I've been around long enough that this question of eliminating, you know, non-controversial old statutes, et cetera, comes up from time to time, and then you run into somebody for whom that particular bill is important. And so I'm wondering if there are any of those bills that the governor's identified, or I shouldn't say bills, but actual laws that the governor's identified as potential candidates for the wastebasket. Have you started to get some pushback? Wait a minute, we need the council on, you know, left-handed plumbers or whatever it may happen to be.
At the meetings I attended, I felt that the agencies were very thorough. If there was any questions, if anybody had any questions about the validity of a bill, if we needed to get rid of it or if we should get rid of it, they were willing to reach out to whoever they thought that might affect and make sure that there weren't going to be repercussions by taking it out. So I do think they're doing a very thorough job of taking a look at what's going to be taken off the books. And there could be some of that, but I think they're safeguarding as much as they can to have that not happen.
Representative Hackbarth, any thoughts?
Well, an unsession, well, that was probably a bad choice of words, I think, because the only way you can have an unsession is if you don't have a session at all. And I'm kind of surprised that somebody didn't get up on the House floor on opening day and make a motion for sine die, because that's the only way you're going to have an unsession. You're right, absolutely right, Senator, that we always have a reviser's bill to get rid of some of these stupid laws that are on the books that we never use or never refer to anymore, and that happens all the time anyway. I have not had anyone call me and say, hold it a minute, you can't get rid of this or that. Some of the things that I've seen, I sit on the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, so some of the things I've seen that they're trying to get rid of are pretty non-controversial things. Mm-hmm. I mean, they did a good job of looking for things they can get rid of, but they're not very controversial at all. So they're going to go away. But what's surprising to me is some of these laws are dumb, and they need to be getting rid of. But for an unsession and getting rid of old, stupid statutes, why are so many agencies, state agencies, introducing more of the same ignorant bills? We had a couple of bills in the Environment Policy Committee last night, that were absolutely insane to even talk about. Getting rid of, making it illegal to do lead wheel weights and things like that. Those things are going away anyway. The industry is changing. They're moving to steel weights, and there was a number of things in that bill that we do not need to address. Everything is changing. They're going away from those things. So why are we putting more of those kind of statutes on the books when we don't need to do it?
Well, then you'll have something to do in the next unsession.
I guess.
Representative Bly, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think I agree with Representative Hackbarth that the name probably wasn't the best. But I think the governor is very serious, though, and I think he's sending a message that he wants to make government more efficient. And he challenged his agencies to come up with proposals that would really strip back things that are cumbersome or unneeded or unnecessary. And I think it's a good thing that he's addressing that. I think, we weren't sure what he meant by it or how to address it when we first heard about it. And I've taken it to constituents when I go out to town meetings and say, if there's something out there that you would like me to suggest, let me know. I haven't got a lot of people taking me up on that, but okay, it does get some discussion going. But I give him some credit for, I mean, there's been lip service to things about, trying to streamline things or make things more efficient. And I think he's really making an effort to do that. And maybe there'll be other ways of doing it as well.
Well, I've had neighbors who come up with ideas for unsession and actually good ideas that we're putting into bills. I think some of the, unsession is fine. It's a short session, so there's not a lot of time to do an unsession when you also have to do a bonding bill and you also have to do everything else that we're tackling in this session. So it kind of takes up the conversation, but it's really not the entire picture of what we're dealing with in this short session.